9 weeks ago today, I had a very serious car accident, and I have some brain trauma and broken bones as a result of it. I just thought to document my story a tiny bit in the hopes that it might help somebody else. Some of the main problems that have come up for me are my speech, in that you may notice I put gaps where there shouldn't be gaps in my speaking. I also stutter under stress, and the biggest thing for me is my short-term memory. So here, where you can't see, I've written some notes for what I wanted to say to you and to thank you for your support. So my long-term memory seems to be fine. My short-term memory is pretty trashed. And then there's things every day that I'm doing that I'm not aware that I do. For example, the other night, both my kids were in the kitchen. They live with me. And I asked them, remember to put the bread in the fridge. And they both stopped and turned around and looked at me and said, do you mean the bread in the fridge? And I said, well, yes, that's exactly what I just said. And they both burst out laughing and told me that I had told them to put the cat in the fridge. I would argue black and blue I didn't, but both of them say I did. So I guess I'm getting my words muddled up. And the last 9 weeks for me have been a blur of friends offering support in so many different ways, and occupational therapists and physiotherapists and neurosurgeons and doctors and psychiatrists and psychologists. I've barely had a day to myself. So prior to this, my life was incredibly busy. Sorry, I'm having to go back to my notes all the time so I remember what I'm talking about. My daughter was at school in Melbourne, but living with me on the Bellarine Peninsula. And so I was having to drive 256 kilometres a day to get her to school, or stay in hotels a couple of nights a week. My dad has cancer and needs constant attention and wounds dressing. And my son is at university and has some interesting needs of his own. But somehow we were managing to make it all work until this happened, and everything ground to an immediate and drastic halt for everybody in my family. So I just wanted to say thank you to the people who have stood by me, understood that this has been challenging, and offered their support in so many ways, even just talking to me on the phone and being okay when halfway through a sentence I forget what I'm talking about. I'm sorry. Sorry. Okay, so the good parts of this. There are good parts. I've developed a stutter under stress. Now, I realise that that may not sound like a good thing, but it kind of is, because it's acted like a barometer to tell me where there's stress in my life that was previously unknown. My doctors are funny. One of them said to me, you use your brain so much for what you do that if you lost 1%, you would notice it. And I don't mean to be rude, but I have other clients and they could lose 10% of their brain and they wouldn't even notice. It was kind, but he said it's actually true. He said, because I do so much with my mind, you may not know, but I duxed Australia in physics and chemistry. I'm a gemologist, I'm a geologist, a natural therapist, international lecturer, etc., etc. There's lots of accolades there, but I think about things a great deal. And my stress release is extreme walking, sports, getting out and about in nature, So as a result of this accident, you may or may not know, I suffered 6 broken ribs all down this side, and they are still broken, and my sternum shattered into many pieces. My lung was punctured. One of my other lung, I don't know if it's the same lung or not, but collapsed, and a tiny, tiny tear in my heart. Serious back injury and neck injuries as well, which I'm still working on with the physios and the occupational therapists who have been my saviours, my godsends. But I wanted to talk to you briefly about PTSD and some of the things that I've learned. Please excuse my appearance, obviously a little bit emotional, and I certainly can't get to the hairdresser to get the hair colour trimmed or touched up, and I really don't know if this is making sense or not. In my head it is, but I don't know whether it's coming out making sense or not. But I've learned quite a lot about PTSD over the last couple of months and how it affects us. And I kind of wanted to just make this video because I do forget down the track. And I thought if I quickly zip it out, I might be able to remember and to get that message out in the hopes that it helps somebody else. Anyways, so one of the things that I've learned about PTSD is that the same thing can happen to 2 different people and cause PTSD in one and not in the other. And one of the things that I've learned is that you will be possibly more affected by PTSD if you are in a situation where you are helpless, if you are dependent. This is one of the reasons why childhood PTSD is so drastic, because a child is dependent on their parents for their house, their food, their basic existence. So when a trauma happens to a child under that circumstance, it's potentially seriously devastating to them because they don't have a method of leaving. So for myself, I'd been under a lot of stress for a lot of years, but somehow holding it all together. And my neurosurgeon said that he often sees this with people that use their mind a lot, or they do a lot of things, and then an accident happens and it just kind of, he said it's like pouring water into electrical circuitry. It doesn't just overfill for a little while and go back to normal. It kind of fries the circuitry, and often there's a lot of rebuilding that has to take place. But when I was in the hospital, I went from the site of the accident to the emergency department of the hospital by ambulance with many injuries and many broken bones and obviously a lot of pain. And I was physically unable to move. I couldn't breathe properly. I couldn't cry. I couldn't cough. I couldn't sneeze. I couldn't get up. I couldn't get down. I couldn't roll over. I basically was like a baby, totally, totally dependent. And the hospital was amazing, but it showed me some of the stress our health workers have to deal with, because I was put into an emergency, into the ER, and it's a big area with like sections, but they don't have doors. They just have a hospital curtain at the end. So while you're waiting to be assessed to see if you've got spinal damage, they can't move you. They can't take you anywhere else. And obviously it's not only me that's in the ER, it's other people as well. And so you have to wait your turn. And I learnt pretty quickly what the hospital workers have to deal with in forms of abuse, which was fairly shocking. I remember that I was laying on the bed on my back, racked with pain, and a thin curtain at the end of the bed, and there was a gentleman that was drug affected, and he was standing effectively at the end of my bed with just this thin curtain between us, and he was irate. He was yelling and screaming and violent and abusive. The guards, if you call them that, I don't know, security, were immediately called. But he stood there, and for quite some time this verbal violent altercation went on, and I've never felt more terrified in my life, because when you're laying there knowing that you can't even hide, you can't get away from it, it's incredibly traumatic. And I guess like this PTSD, where you're completely dependent as a child, when you're injured, and I think I've spoken to some elderly people and they've said the same. They said when they were younger, they knew they could fight someone if they got attacked, or worst case scenario, they could just run away and hide. But as you get older and your body doesn't allow you to do that, you can't run away and hide. It becomes incredibly confronting. And for me, I was in that position. I couldn't run away. I couldn't hide. I couldn't go anywhere. And here's this altercation taking place. Coupled with that is I couldn't cry. It hurt too much. I couldn't allow myself to cry. I couldn't sob. My ribs were all broken. My sternum shattered. My lungs collapsed. I couldn't do anything. And they finally got rid of him. And I was going into all of my meditation space that I knew to calm myself down. I couldn't hold my emotional stress release points because I couldn't move my arms, but I was doing everything mentally that I knew how to do under the circumstances, while also being drugged up on morphine to cope with it. And they got rid of him. And then another woman was there, and I think she must have been mentally ill. Her mother was there. She kept screaming that she was being held against her will. She didn't want to be there, and she wanted to get out to see her dead baby. She needed to go to the grave. She needed to go to the funeral. And I could hear her getting closer and closer to the end of my bed. And I was just praying that the curtain would stay there and she wouldn't know that I was there. And I've had some pretty strong experiences in my life. I've had a lot of drastic things that most people wouldn't even read about, but somehow I was okay with all of them. But this, I wasn't okay with it. I couldn't get away from it. I couldn't deal with it. My skills weren't cutting it for me. And eventually one of the nurses came in to check on me, and there was like water running out of my eyes because I couldn't cry. And she goes, "Wait, honey, what's the matter?" And I managed to stutter out to her, "I'm terrified. Get me out of here." And she must have seen the look on my face, and she said, "Just give me 30 seconds. And she went and grabbed somebody, and they immediately wheeled me out of there. They couldn't take me anywhere because they didn't know if I had a broken back at that point or anything. But they wheeled me into another section, and I don't know why all of the hospital was dark, but we were zoomed up through corridors, and they were all dark, and I thought they were taking me into the morgue. So that added some other stress. We managed to get some scans done with lots of people. It took 6 people to roll me over and get me into the huge chamber where they do all of the ultrasounds to work out what was happened. And from there, eventually I was taken to the cardiac ward, where I stayed for a week or so. And because I had a bleed behind the sternum as well, I was in the cardiac ward. While I was in the cardiac ward, I had lots of time to reflect on their code blues that went far too regularly than I would like to acknowledge. And I realised the stress that our healthcare workers are put under. So for me, it was really stressful, but I felt really sorry for these people that are just going to work and doing their best to save lives and having to deal with this every day. But one of, I think, the biggest takeaways that I had from this was learning how stress affects us far more drastically when we're dependent, when we are in a situation. So I've reflected on all the times I might have raised my voice to my children or told them off, how that wouldn't necessarily affect me as an adult, but how drastically it can affect somebody when they're dependent on you or dependent on a situation. And if you've been a person that's been in a situation where you're dependent on others, maybe reflect how that stress may have affected you more. I mean, I have a team of therapists around me helping me to get through this right now, and I'm so incredibly grateful for that. But The other things that have helped, I'll show you this product. This really, really helps. These are called Rescue Pastilles, Remedy Rescues. I have all the gem essences as well, but these are little lollies you can get from the supermarket, and under extreme stress they have really just taken the edge off it. They've made a difference. I had trigger point therapy yesterday, which was just amazing to remove stress out of certain muscles in the body. So if you're struggling a little bit, what I wanted to say to you was, one, thank you so much to all those people that have helped me, but two, reach out when I get better, and I will get better. I'm going to make some more videos and maybe help you understand these things. But if you are beating yourself up, as I am, about I should be well, I should be better now, I should be over this, I should be back to my normal life, maybe realize that it's okay. This was my tough one. It's okay to be doing nothing. It's okay to have time to heal. It's okay to allow yourself to recover from trauma or situations. And there are many therapists with lockdown. More and more therapists have become available. Lots of people are not coping with stress and trauma and lockdown. And my heart goes out to them, and wanting to help them and to support them. In a roundabout way, the healthcare system is just getting so much more support, and it's there for you if you need it. And ask your doctor if you're not coping, because I think in my generation particularly, we had a stigma that you're loony, you're crazy, you need to be locked up. It's a bad thing to see a psychiatrist. And these days it just isn't. It's like, I really think it should be part of everybody's natural health. I'm going to the supermarket to get my fruit and veggies, and once a month I'm seeing a support person to teach me how to cope with things in a better way. So I know this has been a long video and I'm garbling. In my mind it makes sense. I don't know whether it really does or not, but thank you very much for listening, and thank you so much to all the people that have supported me in this somewhat long and probably ongoing journey. Thank you.